Howdy once again folks, and today it's time for something potentially quite special, the new Sony FE 24-70mm f2.8 G Master Mark II. It's exclusively for Sony's E-mount mirrorless cameras, full frame or aps-c, and it's $2,300 in the US, or about £2,100 here in the UK. Even though fast standard zoom lenses are so useful and full frame ones particularly difficult for manufacturers to design, still, that's a huge amount of money, so I'm really keen to see how well it performs. I'd like to thank Sony for loaning me a copy of this lens for a couple of weeks for evaluation. However, this is, as usual, a totally independent review. Somehow or another, I never got round to testing the original version of this lens. That Mark I version is about 6 years old now, and it generally had a good enough reputation, but chief complaints about it were its huge size and weight, and unimpressive image quality when zoomed in. Sony claimed to have fixed all of that with this handy update, and the first thing I'm happy to report is that it is indeed a reasonable size. By no means small, but still a huge improvement over the previous version. At 695 grams or 1.5 pounds, it's a little on the weighty side, but again, that's a 22% weight reduction over the older version, so no serious complaints here. You get quite a number of focus controls on the lens, for starters an auto manual focus switch and a couple of the increasingly ubiquitous focus hold buttons. Then there's an aperture control ring. It can be set to turn smoothly for video work, or it can be set to work with clicks, something that many stills photographers prefer. You can also lock that aperture ring either in or out of automatic mode, helping you to avoid accidental changes. Then comes the lens's averagely smooth turning rubberized zoom ring. It turns without any stickiness to it, although if you want a very precise and smooth zoom action, perhaps for video work, then there's a switch to set it to tight mode, which, well, tightens that zoom ring a little bit, a nice little feature. Then there comes the rubberized manual focus ring, which turns extremely smoothly and is very responsive to being turned. As you can see here, the lens shows almost no focus breathing when you're zoomed in. Zoom out and a little breathing can be seen when you focus pull, but really the most important thing for most video makers is that it doesn't breathe when you're zoomed in and pulling from subject to subject. The autofocus motor works quickly, silently, smoothly and accurately. Absolutely no problems here at all, whether you're shooting in AFS or in autofocus continuous mode. The lens comes with a decently sized plastic hood, which is reverse mountable, has a locking switch, has a removable space for turning filters, and is nicely flocked on the inside. Excellent. The front filter size is a large 82mm wide. Something else I should mention is that this lens does not have its own image stabilization, but Sony's full frame camera bodies virtually all have stabilization built into them nowadays. Overall, it's well and truly 10 out of 10 for build quality here. The lens is a more reasonable size than its predecessor, it's very solidly made, and it's jam-packed with excellent, thoughtful features for stills photographers, but most particularly for video makers. Okay, let's look at its image quality and see if the rave reviews I've been reading are justified. I'll be testing it on a Sony a7R III with its 42 megapixel full frame sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on. Let's start at the widest angle of 24mm and the brightest aperture of f2.8. In the middle of the image we right away see razor sharpness and excellent contrast. Let's look over in the corners. Sharpness and contrast see just a very small reduction here. It's still great image quality though. Stop down to f4 for a little more sharpness and contrast. The lens stays this sharp down to about f11, where a little softness begins to creep in due to the effects of diffraction. Overall, it's a very nice performance here at 24mm. Let's zoom in a little to 40mm. The middle of the image still looks fantastic here, even at f2.8. Corner image quality, well, it's about the same as 24mm, nice and sharp, but not quite as good as the middle. However, this time stopping down to f4 or f5.6 yields more noticeable improvements and the lens gets very sharp from corner to corner. Again, the lens stays this sharp down to about f11. Okay, let's zoom in to 70mm now. Call this lens the king of consistency because again, it's the same story. Excellent sharpness in the middle, straight from f2.8, and a slightly softer image in the corners. Again this time the lens stays about this sharp down to f11. Overall, the lens gives such an incredibly steady, evenly sharp performance with very good contrast that it will inspire lots of confidence in whoever might be shooting with it. You should also bear in mind that fast standard zoom lenses for full-frame cameras are some of the hardest imaginable for designers to make, so having said that, it's a pretty excellent performance. Okay, well, let's turn off those in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. At 24mm, the lens's barrel distortion is actually surprisingly lower than average for an optic of this kind, although unsurprisingly, those image corners are pretty dark at f2.8. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 for those corners to brighten up pretty quickly. Zoom into 32mm and that distortion straightens out. Zoom all the way in to 70mm to see some moderate pincushion distortion, and again, fairly dark corners at f2.8. But again, stop down to f4 or f5.6 for those corners to brighten up. So the vignetting is about average here, but distortion levels are lower than I expected. I've certainly seen far worse than this on a standard zoom lens. This lens can focus as closely as about 30cm, which at 70mm can get you fantastically close to your subject. Bravo, Sony! At f2.8, that close-up image quality sees softness and purple fringing. Unfortunately, f4 looks better, f5.6 looks good, and f8 excellent. So if you're shooting up close, stop down. Okay, let's see how well the tested lens performs against bright light. At 24mm we see bitty little flecks of flaring here, nothing to seriously worry about. Zoom in and that flaring gets a little stronger, but it's still much lower than average. While we're working in the dark, let's take a look at chroma levels. It's further good news here. At f2.8 we see only a touch of smearing on bright points of light. Stop down to f4 and image quality there becomes perfect. Let's zoom out and take a look at sunstars. They only really begin to emerge when you stop down to f11. Stop down to f16 or f22 and they look pretty gorgeous, if subtle. Let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. It's hard to get out of focus backgrounds much softer than this on a zoom lens, quite frankly. They consistently look pretty nice and smooth, whatever focal length you're shooting at. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. This is the lens's first noticeable slip-up, as at f2.8 we see quite a lot of colourful bokeh highlights here. At f4 they're reduced, and at f5.6 they're gone. Overall though, well, you might have to pay a small fortune for the privilege of owning this particular camera lens, more than I could afford anyway, but its owners will certainly not be disappointed, as it's clearly one of the sharpest and best performing fast standard zoom lenses in the world, and if you want the best you simply have to pay for it. It's an especially accomplished design for video makers too. Its only real optical struggles come when shooting at very close distances. But then again, the simple fact that it can get you so close to your subject is pretty impressive in the first place and stop your aperture down for those issues to go away. So yeah, if you can afford it and you absolutely need the best possible zoom lens on your Sony camera, then this one has to come. Highly recommended. Thanks for watching everyone, and I do hope you find these reviews helpful. If you do, and you'd like to support this channel while also getting some sweet exclusive videos, early access and other content, then check out my Patreon page in the description below. Ciao everyone.